on this episode of Spirit Talk.
My mother was there also, and I said we were going to get her hair done or something. And I said, Mom, I have a bad feeling, because we were headed toward the airport. That's where we went to get our hair done. I said, I've got a terrible feeling that a plane's going to crash. And that's the day the plane crashed in Chicago, right outside of the airport. And then when we came out of the shop, we saw all the smoke. And I said, oh my God, the plane crashed. She said, how did you know that? And I said, Mom, I get these feelings. And every time I get them, a plane somewhere crashes.
Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness. Welcome, everybody, back to Spirit Talk. This is episode 132, and we've got an interesting episode. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while. Now, a couple weeks ago, on January 12th of this year, 2023, I posted a question on my Twitter, and I asked all the followers, generally or specifically, when it comes to a sixth sense and psychic abilities, what questions do you have? Want to know? I will answer them on Spirit Talk. Now, I got a lot of great questions, and as I was starting to line up the questions for this episode, there was 3 similar questions that were posted that I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a whole episode on this. These 3 questions all related to basically psychic abilities being inherited. Does it pass down from generations? Are you born with them? And there were 3 people that asked the specific questions. One of them was Amy, and her username is Gagnard Amy, Gagnard Amy. She asked, do you think everyone is born with a psychic gift? I believe that every single living soul has a higher consciousness on the other realm. And then when we die and go to the other side, we are attached to collective consciousness and all-knowingness because we become one with the Creator and the Absolute, which is infinite intelligence. So when you say psychic, what is psychic? It's knowing stuff before it happens, knowing stuff about a person without them telling you. Well, that is higher consciousness. That is collective consciousness. So everybody has it, but not everybody coming into this 3-dimensional realm has access to it, and that's the difference. Now, Cheryl asked a question, CHARNOIS 2 is her username on Twitter. So psychic abilities are passed down from family members, inherited? Well, it did in my family. And with a lot of people out there, yes, sometimes it is from their mother, their father, or it skips a generation. It could be one from one of their grandparents. So psychic abilities can be passed down. Doesn't mean everybody gets them passed down to them. That's the thing. Not every single person is going to have psychic gifts that are gifted to them. Now, some people can get psychic gifts. They can have a traumatic experience. They can have a car accident, a near-death experience, an out-of-body experience. And then all of a sudden, they have these abilities. There's been people that have got a concussion, hit their head, and all of a sudden, now they're accessing various forms of consciousness they didn't before. So we're going to go into depth with this particular question because I'm going to have a guest on the show. I'm actually going to interview my mom, Patricia Steinbis Fleming. She was remarried to Ray Steinbis. We're going to interview her because she has psychic abilities, ESP, extrasensory perception. So I thought, why not have a conversation with my mom where we talk about some of the experiences she had, the experiences I had, and the experiences we had together, because she's my mom, right? And that'll give you guys an idea, a great response to that particular question. Now, also, Lisa asked a question on Twitter. Her username is LarknessWCraft. And she says, why some people are born with them and others the abilities do not develop until later in life, psychic abilities. What is your thought on this? So basically, she's asking, why are some people born with psychic abilities while others, they develop later in life? Well, everybody's different. People may not recognize it. They may not be in the environment that causes the abilities to activate? And that's not a question you can give one answer to, because everybody's different. And we do know various people around the world that do have psychic abilities have developed them at certain periods of their life. Sometimes some people had it when they were younger and they don't have it anymore. So what happened? What caused it to change? Don't know. But everybody is different. People are conditioned. Are they conditioned to ignore it or accept it? Because it's not fully accepted in various cultures and societies and certain religions and stuff like that. And some people that have these abilities, they don't even talk about it. They keep it to themselves. So we have to realize that perspectives and awareness are different for every single person. Now, I have some friends that are like, I don't have any psychic abilities at all. Maybe they haven't recognized certain things, but maybe they just don't care and they don't want to develop it. That can happen. But then you have some individuals, they can take courses, they can take classes, and they can learn over a period of time, and they can develop these skills, these abilities to increase their awareness and their perception. Now, I do believe that everybody has an intuition, and they have a certain sixth sense or extrasensory perception to recognize either danger or opportunity. But that's in varying degrees, and it can be heightened or increased if you boost up your psychic abilities and awareness by educating yourself on the different types, but then also practicing various techniques with the right people. And there's many great teachers out there to do so. So you have to educate yourself first, so you're able to recognize what you're actually doing, receiving, and then processing it correctly to identify it as a certain form of a psychic ability or intuition. There was an interesting article that I found on MysteryWire.com. It was actually, I guess, written by George Knapp and Duncan Phoenix, and it was posted on July 15th, 2021. And they asked, psychic abilities could be a genetic trait, scientists say. Are there psychics or seers in your family tree? And one of the people they did interview was Dean Radin. It's interesting here, a comment was made. Every culture in the world has folklore about families where people seem to be psychic, said Dr. Dean Radin, one of the world's premier investigators of psychic abilities and chief institute at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS. So that would suggest that there is an element of the talent that is able to be inherited. That in turn suggests that there are genetics involved. So the U.S. government funded programs to investigate and exploit psychic abilities, including the CIA's work on creating psychic spies known as remote viewers. Other governments did the same, notably Russia and China. Researchers came to believe that most humans have some level of psychic ability and that a small number of individuals qualify as psychic superstars. Dr. Radin and his colleagues set out to see if these abilities are stronger in some family bloodlines. The team was generally surprised by what they found. What we originally thought is that we would find that there would be differences in a positive direction, and a sense we'd find mutations in the psychics as compared to the controls. But actually, it's the other way around, Dr. Radin told Mystery Wire. There are also variants out there. There are mutations. And so the subset that we found in our control group, who never reported any psychic abilities, and one in their family ever did, they are the mutants. So basically saying, well, we're not talking about the X-Men, but people that did not have psychic abilities were mutants. They were deviating from the norm. So the actual genetic makeup is to have some form of psychic ability. If I'm reading this correctly, 3,000 people being interviewed and asked about their personal psychic experiences. Out of the original 3,000 people, only 13 were reasonably sure they had psychic abilities, while 13 said they absolutely did not. As it turned out, the 13 people who ended up were all women. It's very difficult to find 13 women who've never recorded anything psychic or that no one in their family did. That's why it took a long time. So for each of the individuals, we got their DNA, ran the full genome, and then did a variety of bioinformatics type tests to compare the DNA and found out there are differences. Well, as it turned out, we found some differences. Turns out there's a place in the world where there is the variant, which means that there is a deficit of people who are highly psychic. This is interesting. So there's certain areas where some people are less psychic and some areas where people are more psychic. So it was interesting in Dean Radin's study, he was looking at DNA and found that there were some variances, but also that there were some mutations. And the mutations were the people that did not have the psychic abilities. So George Knapp was interviewing him in this article and says, so the bottom line is that most of us have some kind of psychic ability. And Dean Radin says, most of us have at least the potential for having psychic ability. Yeah. Well, that makes sense, and that's just what we were discussing at the beginning of this podcast in response to one of the questions. If you guys want to read the whole article, I will have the link posted on Planet Paranormal underneath the copy and synopsis for this podcast, and I may throw it up on my social media as well, so you guys can read this article at your leisure. But in regards to this episode, I'm going to interview my mom, Patricia Steinbis Fleming. Now, she got remarried years later after my dad, and to Ray Steinbis. They got divorced when I was basically in grade school, and he had passed away, unfortunately, from COVID. So last year, we had moved her into a care center where she lives now. It's like a retirement home, and she's looked at and taken care of, and she's got a nice little place, and she had her 2 cats, and now she's down to the 1 cat because the 1 cat was put to sleep back in the beginning of December, unfortunately. So I went to her place to visit her yesterday on Sunday and interviewed her about this topic. Then I'm going to play for you an audio clip of an interview I had with my dad many years ago, which would have been around probably 2007 when he was in the hospital at the Claremont Center where they were taking care of him because he was semi-paralyzed. And my dad, Reggie Fleming, Reginald Fleming, Reggie Fleming, and we are going to discuss a little bit of that too. The thing that's interesting about this is my father passed away in 2009, and he had a stroke and heart attack around 2004. During that time between 2004 and 2009, I visited him every week in the care center because he was semi-paralyzed from his heart attack and his stroke. And I had the opportunity to ask him questions, and that's what we did. Every time I went to see him, we had a conversation. We talked about a specific topic within our life, past, present, or even future. I recorded a lot of these sessions, not all of them, but I recorded a lot of them on video or on audio. And you can see some of the interviews I had with my dad on Reggie Fleming Interviews that's on YouTube. So if you type in Reggie Fleming Interviews, you'll find 9 of the different interviews that I did with my dad. I still have a lot of content that I have never posted online, and I do plan to go through it this year because there's some gems in there. Some other stuff where my dad talked about the paranormal and stuff like that I would like you guys to hear. But you will get to hear the reason why during this interview with my mom that I am presenting to you a conversation with my father, so you can get an idea how generations can have different types of psychic abilities, but then also can be carried through to their children as well. I do want to share something because during the conversation with my mom, it may get a little bit confusing. My mom was a flight attendant for 30 years. She worked for TWA Airlines. My dad was a professional hockey player, so he traveled a lot because when he was playing hockey, and my mom traveled a lot. So during that time, we had babysitters and maids. Now, people think, oh, wow, you had a maid. You must have had a lot of money. Well, it's not what you think. We would have Swedish maids that would come in from Sweden. They would study to go to school here, and they would live with us, and they would watch me and my sister when my parents were gone. They would take care of the house and everything else. How my parents worked that out, I don't know. I think they got a place to stay. They made a little bit of money, but then they got to go to school as well. So it worked out very effectively for them as well as for us. Well, we went through a few maids, Swedish maids, because a couple of them quit because of the haunted stuff that went on in the house. And then we had other people within the area from Chicago and stuff that also would sit for us. And we had some of my parents' friends. They had some daughters, and those daughters, there was 3 of them, they would babysit us off and on. I would like to interview them in the future, so I hope to call them in the next couple of weeks. I do want to ask them about the stuff that happened in the house, because I do remember speaking to one of them, Connie, 2 years ago, and she had told me a bunch of stuff that happened in the house. And she remembers some of the things me and my sister went through when all the ghosts started appearing. So I do want to do a future podcast on the house we lived in Park Lane. But this particular one's really going to focus on my mom and my dad and our stories together. And the question is, for you is, if you had psychic experiences or you've had a house that was haunted, did you talk about it with your parents? And if they're still alive, have you talked about it? I would suggest you do. Why not get some closure or get some answers? You'd be surprised that when you do open up this conversation, sometimes they'll tell you stuff that you didn't even know happened. that they had never told you, which were conversations I got from my dad and my mom, as well as from some of our sitters, which actually just blew me away. And the one thing that I do want to say about my mom is, even though she says she never saw a ghost, she heard things, she felt things, but she mostly had ESP, this sixth sense that something was going to happen. She had premonitions. She'd get a vision or a feeling before it happens in the awakened state. And then she'd also have like a precognitive dream. She'd have a dream before it happens. And this seemed to be the ability on her side of the family, from her mother and from possibly her grandmother or her aunt. Now, on my dad's side of the family, my dad would also have this sixth sense, this knowingness, but he would see stuff. Now, when I asked my grandma, which was my dad's mom, when I used to go to Canada in the summer when I was in grade school, my grandma never wanted to talk about it. But she would tell me that Bobshi, her mother, my great-grandmother, had experiences and saw ghosts. The problem was, when I was growing up, Bobshi was alive. I mean, she died when I was just before high school. But Bobshi spoke only Polish, so I could not have a conversation with her. And whenever I tried to get my grandma, who spoke Polish, French, and English, my grandma never wanted to talk about it, okay? Which was interesting because my dad never wanted to talk about it growing up either. So it was that type of mentality. And those are the things you run into with certain family members. There's certain families like, we don't talk about this stuff. And just the way it is. So you may be fighting them, trying to get answers, and they just don't want to talk about it. Like, for example, my sister doesn't like to talk about this stuff. She'll just roll her eyes and go, I don't know. But the interesting thing is, talking to one of our sitters, she remembers when my sister was terrified and scared because she saw stuff too. But my sister, and she even says, my sister never wanted to talk about it. But she would comfort my sister when those events would occur when she was watching us at the house. So the problem is when you have these experiences and finding out who has them and who doesn't, sometimes your family members don't want to talk about it. I'm very fortunate that my dad, near the end of his life, decided to talk about it. I'm very fortunate that my mom's always talked about it, but now she's comfortable enough to talk about it publicly. And that's what you're going to hear on this episode of Spirit Talk. Do you think that everyone is born with a psychic gift?
Actually, I don't. I don't think so, but I think it runs in families.
Okay.
From past mothers and grandmothers.
Okay, what makes you believe that?
Because my mother always knew who was on the phone before she answered it. And plus, one time, every time it would rain or storm, she would take me out of my bed and put me in her bed because she thought that the tree next to our bedroom was going to fall. Well, she did that for like a year or two. And then one day, they decided to have that tree taken down because it was getting so big. They had it taken down, and it fell on my bedroom, on my bed.
Oh my God.
So she knew that was going to happen eventually.
Right, beforehand.
Yeah, beforehand. And let's see, what else did she? She did a lot. I can't remember all of it.
Did you and your mother ever talk about the fact that it came true?
No.
Okay.
She wouldn't talk about it.
Did she ever talk about anybody else in the family that would have dreams or anything that would come true?
I think my grandmother did, or my aunt. I'm not sure which.
Okay.
But my mother knew when she died. We lived in Cincinnati. They lived in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. But she said, I think Nana has died.
Oh, wow.
And about an hour or two later, we got a call from my aunt saying she had died.
Right.
And another thing that happened when we were at the church for the funeral for my grandmother,
mm-hmm.
they 4 guys had, or 5, however many it took to carry the coffin out. I got a feeling something was going to happen, and they lost control of the coffin, and it went running down the steps. I never told you that one.
Oh, my God.
It came running down the steps, and I said, I knew that was going to happen.
Oh, my God.
I mean, all 4 or 5 of them lost control of the casket.
Right.
And it just flew out of their hands and went down the stairs. Boom, 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 boom. That was kind of freaky.
That is freaky. That's like, I remember once when I was little in the store, and I think it was with you, or it might have been one of the babysitters, I had said that that man in the store is going to drop something, and then all of a sudden, or run into something or bump something, and then all of a sudden that happened, and he made a big mess and stuff like that. I don't know if you remember that, but...
No, I don't remember that one. I may have been out of town.
Yeah, it might have been one of the sitters. You know, you're telling me about, your grandma had abilities, and then what are the type of abilities that you had?
Oh, my. I had abilities since I was a teenager of planes crashing. Mm-hmm. And when I started flying, I had an ability. I would dream it, and I went, oh, my God, a plane's going to crash. And inevitably, a plane always crashed. And they had one crashed in Chicago, and my mother was there. My mother was there also. And I said we were going to get her hair done or something. And I said, Mom, I have a bad feeling. Because we were headed toward the airport. That's where we went to get our hair done. I said, I've got a terrible feeling that a plane's going to crash. And that's the day the plane crashed in Chicago, right outside of the airport. And then we saw, when we came out of the shop, we saw all the smoke. And I said, oh, my God, the plane crashed. She said, how did you know that? And I said, Mom, I get these feelings. And every time I get them, a plane somewhere crashes. I don't know exactly where it's going to crash, but it usually crashes. And I just had, living here, about a month and a half ago, that a plane was going to crash. Every time I'd go outside, I'd say, I could feel it. It's just something you feel. You know it's going to happen. And then that plane in Europe, about a week or two later, crashed.
Yeah, I actually remember the phone call I had with you a couple weeks ago. You said I had another dream that a plane was going to crash. And I'm like, okay. And yeah, I do remember hearing the news about a week ago or so that a plane did crash.
Yeah, and they were all killed.
Yeah. And I remember, if I reflect back, when Flight 191 leaving Chicago, one of the engines fell off, and so it went into a tailspin, and it crashed right by the motorhomes, the mobile homes, and it was only, 50 yards, 100 yards, or it was very close to where all the oil tanks were.
That's the one I had to dream about.
Right. I remember when you came home that day, and you're with Grandma, and you're like, oh my God, turn on the news tonight, whatever, and there's a plane crash. And you had said something about a week ago about a plane crashing, and you were afraid to fly because you said you were going to not go on some of your flights because you had a dream about a plane crashing.
Well, that one I knew was going to crash in Chicago. That one I felt it so strongly. Right. And I think because I lived there. That's why I felt it so strongly. And
I remember you said you were getting your hair done or your nails done, and you heard this boom.
Yeah.
And I remember you guys went outside to see what had happened.
And I saw the smoke.
And exactly.
That's the plane. When I saw the smoke, I said, oh, my God, that plane did crash. The plane crashed.
Right. I remember you telling me it was this thick black smoke, and you knew, seeing that thick black smoke because it's near the airport, that was a plane that crashed. I remember you telling me that when you came home, exactly. And I've never forgotten that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And then I know you had, of course, we've talked about this a few times. We've talked about Flight 800, TWA. And you used to work for TWA for 30 years, and I remember when it was on the news that Flight 800 went down,
right?
And it was all over the ocean, or the whatever it was, the Gulf. Tell us about that.
That one I had dreamt about, and I was afraid to fly at that time, because we had a certain airplane that had crashed once before. It was a 737, and I was terrified I wouldn't bid the flights on the 737 because of that. And that's what had crashed.
Well, I remember you saying you were on a plane a month before or whatever. You were on that exact plane.
Yep.
And so tell us about that story. So you were on the exact plane, Flight 800, that crashed.
Yes.
They said either it was hit by a missile or that it had some type of electrical failure. But we all believe it was hit by a missile, okay? Whether it was a terrorist attack or whether it was the U.S. Navy was doing some drills and they accidentally shot it down. Regardless, tell us about your experience on that plane a month before it happened.
I was on that plane, and I wondered who the pilots were going to be. And when I was sitting in my jump seat in the upper deck, I had this terrible feeling. I was terrified. I said, oh, my God, this plane's going to crash. I said, not today. Please, God, not today. And I was terrified through the whole flight. We were flying to Europe, and thank God we didn't crash. But another flight, one of our flights crashed, that same airplane that I was on.
I remember you telling me, and I'll just say it real quickly and then you can fill in the details. I remember you saying before that one of the other flight attendants, because you were going up the stairs on the plane? Weren't you going up to the next cabin or something? And one of the flight attendants says, what's wrong? Because you were having this like anxiety attack.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
That was my friend Maureen, who I was flying with. We were both working the upstairs lounge. And as I was walking through the cabin, oh my God, now I remember it. I was walking through the cabin, and when I got to B zone, which was the ambassador section, which went toward first class, it started to hit me. I was right at the door, and I went, oh my God, this plane is going to crash. This plane is going to crash. By the time I got to the stairs to go upstairs, Maureen was sitting up there. I came up on my knees because I was so certain that plane was going to crash. Mm-hmm. It didn't crash that day, but I was terrified through the whole flight. I prayed all the way through the flight. Please, God, don't let it be us. And then after that is when our plane crashed, Flight 800. Because we went over the ocean, and they were heading over the ocean, and we had tons of our crew members on it. And I think that's why it was so terribly strong. Mm-hmm. One of the pilots we had in the cockpit that day was on that plane that crashed.
And didn't you say that one of the engineers or mechanicals or whatever?
Yeah, that was the engineer. He was on my flight that day when I got that terrible, horrible feeling. And when that plane finally crashed, he was killed in that crash.
And didn't he say something to you sarcastically when you were talking about the plane, feeling the plane was going to crash?
How do you remember that?
Because I remember you telling me this years ago.
Yes.
How could I forget?
I did say that. I said, because he came out when I had just come upstairs, and he said, what's wrong, Pat? And I said, I've got a terrible feeling this plane is going to crash. He said, no. He started laughing. He said, no, we're fine, we're good, we checked everything. But then it wasn't too much longer, maybe a month or a couple weeks, I can't remember exactly, when the plane did crash.
Right. I remember...
And he was on the flight, the one that told me, don't worry about it.
I remember you were home, and we turned the TV on in the family room that we had in the corner of the wall.
Didn't I go and fall on the floor?
Yeah, and you said, turn it on. You were kind of yelling at me to shut up and watch this, because he said it's one of your planes. And we're watching this, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, that could be my mom on the flight. And then some of your other flight attendants had called, and you were talking to them all night back and forth about what happened. And I'm sitting there watching the news footage showing just fragments in the water that's floating, and they're putting a rescue team to try to find them and stuff like that, and then they're trying to figure out what happened. I remember that just for days, and then I remember that TWA Airlines went through a whole bunch of executive problems and stuff, and the business, and because of what had happened, and they were doing an investigation with the whole... Do you remember any of that?
I don't remember.
The CEO left the company and stuff like that?
I don't remember much about that, but I know they couldn't figure out why it crashed.
Right.
Because it had been checked thoroughly before they left, like we were on that same plane weeks before. Right. And they theorized that something may have hit it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. And I remember the one time when I got in a car accident, which would have been in 92, 93, I just bought that new Chevy Blazer, and I only had it for about a month. And I crashed about, a couple blocks away, and I ran home. And then...
I knew you were in trouble.
Yeah, you told me after I came and told you.
I went upstairs to the upstairs to put away laundry or something, and I got this terrible feeling, oh my God, just something happened to Chris. Something just happened to Chris. And I was terrified. And I went and put my laundry down, and by that time, when I got everything put away, you were downstairs.
Yeah.
You would come home. I said, what happened? You said, my car just crashed. I went, oh my God, I knew it. I knew something was wrong with you.
But you also said, oh my God, I had this feeling earlier today.
Oh, yeah.
And you said something about the angels. What did you say? Do you remember?
I don't.
The angels?
The angels.
Okay.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I think I said, after I got the feeling that you were in trouble, something had happened to you, I said, please, God, keep Chris safe.
Right. And I remember when I was in the car, because I got off of work, I started earlier that day at the newspaper at like 6 in the morning. And then when I got off of work earlier, so I went to Lifetime Fitness to work out. And then when I was driving home, back then we rarely wore a seatbelt, so I didn't have my seatbelt on. As I'm driving my car, I get this overwhelming sense of an angel, and I see it in my mind's eye, above me, saying, put your seatbelt on. And I look up in my car, I go, what? It says, put your seatbelt on. I said, no, I'm okay, I'm going to be fine. And then it happened again, where I felt it and saw it, telling me, put your seatbelt on, yelling at me. So I'm like, fine, I'll put my seatbelt on. So I'm looking up at it as I'm putting my seatbelt on. So this was about maybe 20 minutes before the accident happened. So what I was amazed when you told me, you're like, oh my God, I had a feeling something earlier was going to happen, so I did a quick prayer, please protect Chris, keep him safe. And I think that prayer allowed the angel to come forward and tell me to put my seatbelt on, because I remember when I'm standing next to my car, it was a rollover, it was flipped over because I rolled over the street, and the police officer and the paramedics are looking at my car, looking at me. They says, what are you doing standing? He says, nobody walks away from a rollover. And they looked at the car and they looked at me and they says, you're lucky that you had your seatbelt on. If you didn't have your seatbelt on, you most likely would have broken your neck and died because of the rollover. And because it's an SUV and there's, you've been flying around inside the car.
It's right near our house.
Right, it's 4 or 5 houses down. So the fact that you had that feeling, you said the prayer, and within time and space on the other side, an angel comes and tells me to put my seatbelt on, I will never forget that, because that shows me that prayer does work.
Right.
Right.
I believe that.
Now I want to tell you this, because I don't know if I ever told you this. I may have. But I remember when I used to stay with Grandma when I was in grade school, when I was a lot younger, and I'd stay there all summer long because me and Kelly would just have a great time with Grandma. We'd play with the neighborhood kids and play baseball, and it was a lot of fun. So Dad liked it, and you liked it because we were out of the house. You guys had the house to yourself, and then Dad liked the fact that I was spending time with his mother. But I remember telling Grandma, Julie Fleming, some of my stories, and she didn't like to talk about that. She goes, we don't talk about that stuff in this house. And I asked her, because I knew you had dreams that would come true, and I had dreams that would come true, and I asked Grandma, did she have any abilities or see ghosts or anything like that? She goes, no, she didn't, but Bobshi did, which was my great-grandma, her mother. And she goes, you need to talk to Bobshi. Well, I couldn't talk to Bobshi because Bobshi was 91, 92 years old, and she only spoke Polish. But my grandma, my dad's mom, said that her mother had experience and saw stuff. Now, Dad, growing up, used to always choose to ignore talking about what was going on in the house. He didn't want to talk about it. A lot of times he says, just ignore it, it'll go away. That was it. There was no conversations with Dad talking about the ghosts in the house. But when he got older, and I was doing an article for, I think it was Chicago Tribune or Sun-Times, and I told them what was going on in the house, this and that. They wanted to talk to Dad to confirm that this went on in the house. And I'm like, oh, shit. I'm like, Dad's going to deny it or this and that. And then next thing you know, the reporter calls me back and says, okay, yeah, it's good. And plus, your dad said he saw a ghost a week ago. I'm like, what? So I called up Dad. I said, you saw a ghost? He goes, well, I saw a man hovering. And I said, where? He goes, in the bed. He goes, Carol's sleeping next to me. And when I'm sleeping there, I wake up and I see this man hovering above Carol. I said, is that the first time you saw something like that? He goes, no, I've seen it a couple times. I go, why don't you tell me? He goes, why should I?
Carol died. Yeah.
No, I know. But Mom, this was Dad had this experience in the 90s. Okay, this was like in the mid to late 90s. And I'm sitting there going, Dad, why didn't you tell me this? He goes, well, it's just no big deal. It's just no big deal. I saw it, and it goes up. Did it say anything? He goes, no, just looked at her, then looked at me, and then floated back up the ceiling and was gone. I was like, holy cow. And then when Dad had a stroke and heart attack in 2004, and he was hospitalized, for like 5 years, we talked about a lot of this stuff. And he said that, yes, he saw the people that were in our house, the spirits, but he says there's no such thing as ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts. They're just people. And so his interpretation was different than mine. He says, Chris, they're just people. They're not ghosts. There's no such thing as ghosts. I said, okay, so you saw people in the rooms in the house, floating through the walls, going up and down the hallways. He's like, yeah, sometimes yes. And you chose not to say anything. He says, son, I had to go to work. I had to find a job. I had a lot of responsibilities. I had to put food on the table, all this other stuff. He's like, I didn't have time to think about and worry about that stuff. I needed to sleep at night. Yeah, I know, he wasn't the greatest at supporting, but the fact of the matter is that he's stating he did see these things, but they were just people to him, not ghosts. So when you connect the dots, and someone asked the question, is it hereditary that people have psychic abilities, a sixth sense, ESP? I believe yes, it is inherited. Do you believe that too?
Oh, yeah, because mine started when I was about 6 or 7 years old. Another thing that happened in the house where Mom was, Dad would travel once a week. Did I tell you about the accident with my dad?
Yes, you did once, but tell us again.
Okay. My mother she was ironing, and I was in the other room watching TV, and she started to get really upset, and I said, what's the matter? She said, your dad had a car crash. No, wait, it wasn't a car. It was a plane, a small airplane.
Yeah, it was, I remember.
It was a small airplane. She said, your dad's been in an accident in the plane. I went, oh, yeah? She said, oh, my God. And she was totally freaked. Right. And about an hour or 2 or 3 later, I can't remember when, she got a phone call, and she said, that's your dad. And she picked up the phone, and he told her he'd been in a small airplane crash.
Wow.
I don't remember where it was, but he would take commuter flights to where he would have to go work. And that crashed. And then I just remembered something else. When I still lived in that house.
Park Lane, or the house you grew up in?
The one I told you about, the tree fell on my bed?
Okay, the one you grew up in, yeah.
Okay. There was something, and this went on for almost a year. I would be in my bed. My bed faced the hallway.
Right.
It was a long hallway that went into my mom and dad's room, and then after that there was a living room and then the hallway. And I was wide awake when this happened. I would be lying in my bed, and I would wake up, and I could feel, I called it the thing, coming from my mom's bedroom down the hallway toward me. Wow. And I knew if it got to my bed and I moved, I would die. Wow. So I would turn over in my bed to face the wall, and I wouldn't move. I barely breathed. And I could feel, it was not something I saw. I felt it. It was a strong feeling.
Like evil or angry or what?
It was a person, but I never saw a figure or shape. Okay. I felt it.
Right.
It was and this house we lived in was over 100 years old.
Oh, okay.
So it would come slowly down the hall, and I would feel it coming, and I would turn over in my bed, face the wall, put the covers over my head, and not move. And I could feel it come right up to my bed. It would stand over my bed or loom over my bed. And I knew if I did but one movement, it was going to kill me. And then I would wait, and it would slowly, slowly turn, go back down the hall, and then the feeling disappeared.
Right.
And I knew it was gone.
What do you think it was? Do you know?
I have no idea. But in that house, it could have been anything. Because, like I say, how many people lived in that over 100 years?
Did you ever say anything to your mom or dad?
I told my mother about it. She found me in one time. maybe a couple times, she'd find me asleep in the bathroom in the morning, in the bathtub.
Oh, Jesus.
And that's because there were certain times that before it got down the hall, I knew it was coming. I would go into the bathroom and get in the bathtub and cover my head because I thought, it won't find me here. I did that many times, too.
Oh, my God. Well, Mom, Dad had said that I used to lock myself in the bathrooms in our house in Park Lane. I have it on recording.
I don't know about that.
Dad says because of the ghost, I used to lock myself in the bathrooms, which I barely remembered. I remember one time going in there just because I was afraid to come back out in the hallway, but I don't.
Well, we had something happen in that house.
So the fact that you did too, but yours was different. You actually got in the tub and covered up.
No, but I was at my old house in Cincinnati.
Yeah. How old were you? Do you remember?
I was probably between 7 and 10.
Okay.
Old enough to know something was bad coming after me. You just made me forget something else. Oh, I know. We were all in bed one night, and we had the Swedish girl in what used to be Kelly's nursery.
Okay.
And I was in my room, and you were in your room. And somebody was knocking on the door and ringing the doorbell. And it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. Your dad was out of town.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my God, who is that? So Eva heard it. She was in her room. I heard it. I don't know if you heard it. I don't remember. But she and I both got up. We went and looked out the front door. We had a door, not the front door, but the stairway. We looked out, and then we went in the living room and looked out, and it kept ringing the doorbell. And there wasn't anybody there. And this is early morning. It was still dark out.
Right.
But I always kept a light on in the front porch. Nobody was there.
Well,
and it was ringing the doorbell and knocking on the door. I don't know who that was.
Well, do you remember how old maybe Kelly and I would have been?
You were still living at home. Kelly was still living at home. She was...
So we were in grade school.
No. Well, yeah, you had to, because that's when I had the Swedish girls. Yeah. Yep. And she got freaked out completely. And then we had one Swedish girl. I came home from a trip, and this is the weirdest. Came home from a trip, and she said, my mom and dad, I have to call my mom and dad. They want to talk to you. So I called them. They were in Sweden. Cost me a fortune. And I said, what's going on? And they said, our daughter's coming home tomorrow. We made a reservation for her on an airplane. She can't stay in your house because she feels things and she's very scared in your house. I lost her. Next day she left.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one?
I remember that one, and I remember also the woman, the black woman. She was so nice.
Oh, God, yes. She's another one.
Yes.
Felt things. She said, I can't stay here, I'm afraid.
She said, you got the devil in the house, which she told Dad.
Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah.
That was in our house that we lived in Hoffman Estates.
Correct. Park Lane, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so there was a couple sitters that I remember they had issues of stuff that went on. And was Eva the one where, because you remember this story, because you and I went to the library looking at books, is someone was ringing the doorbell, and so I looked out my window, because my window is right above the front door, and there's a shadow of a woman in like a late 1800s, early 1900s
That's what you
dress.
told me. I remember that now.
And she was holding a lantern, and there was a dog next to her, and you can kind of hear the dog growling. So I looked, I'm like, who the hell is this in the middle of the night? So the maid wakes up, and she's, babysitter, we call maid, it's like a babysitter. She's watching us while
live
out of town. Yeah, live in. She looks out the window, and she's freaked. And she did not want to go down there and open up the door. So we're standing on the stairs looking towards the door, and I keep racing back up to the window watching. And she goes, she goes like, I'm afraid. And then someone started pounding on the door then. Then they started pounding.
That could be the one that left.
And then I go look at the window, and there's nothing there. And then she goes down, and she told me to come with, because she was terrified, and opens up the door, and it's Dad. And Dad's screaming and yelling, why the hell didn't you open the door? Because he came home early from some trip or whatever. And I'm like, Dad, there was a woman standing outside with a lantern and a dog. He's like, what? He goes, you're just imagining. I go, no, come look. So we go look up. We go up to my room. We look. We don't see anything. So Dad goes back outside and stands where he was, and we look and we see his shadow, which is completely different than the shadow that we saw of the woman holding a lantern and a dog next to her. Huh. So we were just like, this makes no sense. He goes, well, you guys are just imagining it. And she's like, I'm not imagining it. She's like, I looked out the window and saw this figure. Chris looked out and saw this figure. The question is, why? Who was it? Why were they there doing this when it was Dad standing at the door?
I don't know.
Unless Dad came home and then this thing got scared and left. I don't know. But the fact that you said you had something at the door that would ring. And remember, too, the garage used to go up sometimes, and then there'd be nobody there. The garage door would go up. We hear the garage going up, and we go into the garage, and the garage door would be open, or it wouldn't be open, but we'd hear the sound of the garage going up. And that happened a couple times, I remember, in that house. So that gets more into the ghosts and paranormal. But when we compare Dad, myself, and you, I saw physical apparitions, ghosts that were in the hallway, above the bed, coming out of the walls. Dad saw them as well, but you didn't see ghosts. You just would feel stuff, hear stuff, and have visions, like dreams that come true, precognition, premonitions, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting how, as I got older, realized, when Dad told me that he saw stuff, his mother didn't, but then his grandmother, my great-grandma, did, so that runs in that family, but then also your side of the family, so it seems that I got a lot of those abilities from both you and Dad.
Well, there are things that I probably don't remember that happened in that house, but I will tell you one thing I did. When we sold the house, I was leaving with Joanne, my girlfriend. She was taking me to my other house, which we had rented in Palatine. And I don't know why I said it. I should never have said it. But I said to them, and their daughter was with them, I said, I hope you enjoy the ghosts.
I remember.
And I freaked out that kid so bad that she was having nightmares of people in the house. And I think she saw them.
Right.
I do think she saw them. But why I said that to him, I had to. Because I knew the house was haunted.
Right. Was that 91? Was it 90 or 91?
I don't remember the years, Chris. I just remember all these things. But I do remember it was a mean of me to say that, but I couldn't resist because I was actually warning them.
Right.
And I heard later from our next door neighbor, Penny, that they had talked to her and she said, did they ever have ghosts in the house? And she said, well, I don't know. Pat really never said anything. And she said, well, my daughter's seeing things. And when Pat left, she told us to beware of the ghosts. Don't be afraid. Or I don't know what I said, but I did say something about ghosts to them.
I remember the real estate agent called and you thought we were in trouble.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that, too. He said, why did you tell them you have ghosts in your house? They believe it. I said, well, we did. I wasn't lying. They said, you freaked them out so bad they want to sue you for selling them a house that had ghosts. I said, you can't sue somebody for having ghosts in their house. How can they prove that?
But then you also said that, no, if you have something like this, you're supposed to disclose it in the real estate contract.
Oh, that's true.
And I remember we had this discussion, and I was like, oh, shoot, So, yeah, that was
freaky.
That's some wild stories from what we went through in that house. So I just find it fascinating because, when someone asks a question, is these types of abilities and seeing ghosts inherited? Does it get passed down? From our perspective, yes. Because your mother, you, me, Dad's great-grandma, him, me, and who knows how further down the line it goes. We just don't communicate with them, so we don't know. But then even Molly, your brother's daughter's daughter has abilities, Molly, because I remember when Laura called me after 9/11, and she said that Molly, who was only 8 or 9 years old, woke up the night before 9/11 screaming that from a child's perspective, she was calling them Mexicans flying planes, okay? But when you look at a Mexican nationality with Middle Eastern, if you don't know the difference, you would think somewhat similar, okay?
Yeah.
Just skin color and just the way they look with the darker hair. Well, she said that she saw Molly saw Mexicans getting on planes and flying them into buildings. And when the news hit of what happened that morning, Laura was like, oh my God, I think Molly's psychic. Will you talk to her? So I talked to Molly on the phone when she was only 8, 9 years old about what she experienced. And I said, Laura, I go, she's definitely got experiences. And then I remember a couple years later, probably about not a couple years later, I remember about 5 years ago, because I've been speaking at colleges 2006, I went to school in Cincinnati, to the University of Cincinnati. Molly was there. It was either that school or another school. And she came to one of my lectures and my ghost hunts, and we ghost hunted together on campus. So I got to ghost hunt with my cousin's daughter.
It's your cousin.
Laura is Uncle Larry's daughter.
Right.
Okay, so that's his granddaughter.
Right.
It's his granddaughter. No.
She would have been your cousin also.
Okay, so
your
cousins.
cousin was Molly.
Yeah.
And then she had a child, so that would have been...
Yeah, Molly's in her 20s now, I think. Maybe
she's
30s
much
or
older than
30s. She's in her early 30s.
much older than that.
So Molly has abilities because she senses stuff and sees stuff. So that's someone else from your side of the family, but from your brother's side. So people do get inherited these abilities from generation to generation. It may skip a generation or two, but it's still there in the DNA.
Well, another thing, I'm living in this nursing home now, and I started seeing, I would be sitting in my chair watching TV, and I started seeing black forms go from my door to my kitchen. Mm-hmm. And first it freaked me out. I thought, what the hell was that? I thought it was one of the cats, but it wasn't.
Right.
They were sleeping. One was sleeping here, one was up there sleeping. And from that point on, in fact, I just saw them the other night.
What happened the other night?
It's just forms.
Okay.
One was a man form.
Okay.
That I knew because it was tall. It was a tall form, and it was a man. It looked like a man, but it was invisible. I mean, you could see through it.
Transparent, yeah.
And it was black. And that one went through the door to my kitchen also. And I thought, who was that? I thought that was my husband who had died.
Oh, wow. Right, yeah.
But now, just last night, I see these black forms. They go really fast. They go from there, over there, and then they're gone.
Right.
So I've got them here too. But now I'm not afraid of them because it could have been somebody. This place has been here for 20 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just died, actually. All 3 of them just died. But a lot of people that were in this place died in this room.
Right.
So it could be their spirits or whatever. I don't know.
So is there any other occupants of people that live here in this retirement community? Have you ever told them about what you've seen? Have they seen stuff? Do you know?
Yes. Lonnie
Okay.
and Kelly. They work here. They watch Chris's podcast or whatever he has when he talks about. They watched part of the movie he made in Ireland or Scotland, whatever.
Yeah.
And they have been telling me stories. In fact, just last week, Kelly, who works here, who I've talked to a lot about this stuff, she believes in it. She saw a black form in the front living room.
Oh, wow.
And I just come in from the living room, and they were all standing there, and the cleaning lady was there, Lonnie was there, and Kelly was there. Lonnie and Kelly work here, and they're the ones that believe in this stuff,
Yeah.
and they've seen stuff. And, I got to tell you about Kelly. That's the one, another one that works here. But anyway, Kelly said, just the other night I saw a black form. She said, I thought it was your cat that got out.
Oh, my God.
I said, no. And then they heard cat crying. Mm-hmm. She heard a cat crying. And she said, it could have been Pudge.
Oh, my God. Well, remember when I came here after my trip, because I got back December 2nd from filming. I was busy for a couple weeks, and I came to see you. You know, you had put Pudge to sleep, you know, your cat that you had for almost 20 years.
Pudge was a black cat.
Yeah, black cat. you had put him to sleep while I was out of the country, which I was not happy about because I wanted to be there with Pudge when he went to sleep. But regardless, as I was walking towards your door down the hallway, I saw something black fly across the room towards your room, and then it went through the wall. And then when I was in here, I also saw something race across. I said, oh my God, and I was feeling Pudge.
Yeah, you did.
I felt that, and I told you that. And I said, I think Pudge is still here. I think his spirit's here.
Well, my other cat, Angel was here with Pudge. They had lived together. In fact, Pudge, when Angel was a tiny kitten, we brought Angel in, and Pudge started playing with her, and they were close from then on. Lately, she has been going toward the door, crying. She cries and cries. I said, what are you crying for? And she looks around, and I'm going, I think she feels Pudge or something, because she never did that before Pudge died,
Right.
ever.
Right.
And we had been here for months and months and months and months. She never did that. But now she does it. Every once in a while, she'll get freaked out. She'll kind of walk around, and then she walks over to the door crying, and stands by the door and cries and cries. She does. She just did it last night. That's why I'm afraid. She's gotten out of the room twice.
Angel has?
Yes. When I open the door, she's right there, and she'll cry and zip right past me.
Oh,
and
geez.
she goes down in the one rec room, which is down the hall, and walks all around there and looks and smells. And she's afraid to go down the one hall, because she started to go down there, and I said, Pudge, Angel, no. So she just turned around and looked at me, and I said, come on, get in here, get in here. So I went up to her, and I kind of shoved her back toward the room. She came in the room. But she was looking for something.
Wow.
And now she goes to the door and she cries. She wants to get out. She wants to get out. So I don't know what that's all about. That's something weird.
I wonder, just right now, if any of the spirits that are here, they're obviously listening to what we're saying, if you could say something on this recorder. Now, during this part of the interview, I decided to take the recorder that I had and ask a few questions and see if I captured anything on the recorder. I didn't really play it back until I got home to prepare for this podcast. Now, my mom's seen multiple spirits in her unit at the care center, as well as some of the workers, as she's mentioned earlier. But there were some responses to our questions. And I know it may be hard for some people to hear it, because it is an EVP, and it's probably C grade, not the best quality EVP, but it's still there. And it's directly responding to what I'm asking, and it's very important to what my mom and I were discussing, where we believe we were seeing Pudge. So I'm going to play it for you for your own analysis. These responses are very interesting because they tend to be frequency bursts of vocals being stated within the atmosphere of my mom's room. But then again, you're going to hear near the end what sounds like a cat crying. Pudge crying. Just right now, if any of the spirits that are here, they're obviously listening to what we're saying, if you could say something on this recorder. Now, it sounds like right there was a response that says, Pudge wanted to see you, or Pudge wants to see you. Have a listen to this. Is Pudge, the ghost, the spirit of Pudge, here in my mom's unit? In this CVP, it sounds like it's saying heaven, he'll be here, which means he's actually in heaven, but he visits my mom. If so, how long will Pudge be here?
I'll go over toward the door.
Over towards the door? Did you guys hear it? What's remarkable, it sounds like there's a male voice just before the cat's meow that seems to say, talk to them, something else, and then you hear this, meow. Here's the thing about Pudge. Pudge used to have this quick little chirping sound that was very distinct with his personality. And when I heard this, I had to call my mom and tell her, Mom, I got this. It's on the recorder. And that's what you're hearing.
I'll go over toward the door.
Over towards the door? Mom wants me to walk over to where she sees it.
The door.
Yeah, okay, I'm walking over by the door.
And over here. Because she always goes over here.
Yeah, so I have to wonder if Pudge is still around.
Now I'll probably get more ghosts because we got...
Because we're doing this. Because the picture? Oh, I don't know.
I'll find out.
But I need to hang that. All right, anything else you can think of? Is that it?
Oh, there's probably a lot more, but I can't remember half of the stuff I've
No, that's awesome.
felt.
I think I'm going to call Connie this week and just get her stories on audio. So I might
She's
touch base.
still alive?
Yeah, she's still alive.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I talked to her over a year ago because there was a show that wanted to do a story on all these people. And they talked to some of the people, Dory, Connie, and Suzanne, about some of the stuff that went on in her house. But the show never happened, this episode of us, so I want to interview them.
Remember the time we were in the house and we heard the howling in the dining room? Remember that one?
Yeah.
We were all in the kitchen and all of a sudden we hear this, in the dining room.
Yep.
And we got up and we looked, there was nothing there.
Yep. I just told this story 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
And then we turned the light off in the kitchen. Kelly was at camp or somewhere. We went upstairs into your room. We closed the door, and I ended up staying in your room. And I was sitting on the couch while you were over by the bed reading or doing something, and then we started hearing noise coming from the house. You thought maybe Dad broke into the house because you guys were divorced at the time, or going through divorce, whatever it was. So you and I cautiously went downstairs, and I think I had something in my hand, a bat or something. I don't remember what it was. And we thought we heard glass breaking and stuff like that. So we expected to go see glass broken, like the mirror or something else, but nothing was broken.
Oh, that's when we thought the hall tree had fallen over.
Right.
I remember that because I thought, oh, not my hall tree. But it was perfectly fine.
It was perfectly fine. And then we went in the basement. The only thing that was out of the ordinary was there was a picture of Dad that I had hanging on the wooden girder in the back part of the basement, and that was off the girder on the floor. So that fell, but that didn't sound like, glass that broke or anything else, like the noise that we heard. So whatever it was in the house was creating all these phantom noises, and when we went down there was nothing that was broken.
No.
Yeah, I remember that. I was terrified. You were terrified. And I thought, which I don't know if I ever told you, but I had been out playing with Blue and Brian, and we had ding-dong ditched this woman's house that Blue had said was a witch. She wasn't a witch, but for some reason he was making up a story that she was a witch. Well, we ding-dong ditched her house, and we ran behind this other house where there was a fence. She got in her car and drove off in a station wagon, and we thought she was looking for us. So I was like, oh my gosh, she's coming after us. So basically we hid behind Blue's house, and then eventually I got on my bicycle and rode back home. So when I got home, I was thinking, oh no, this witch is going to find me. So then when we heard the howling, I thought maybe it had something to do with the witch. But she's not a witch. Kids they make stories about somebody that's not true. So yeah, no, it's funny you remember that. But yeah, that howling was like, because I remember you said, is that one of your friends messing around? I said, no, I watched him go inside.
Scary.
It
freaked me out.
It went through the whole house.
Yeah. It was
a moan, a ghostly moan, like oh, like that. Yeah. That was scary. Yeah, good old Park Lane. How you doing, Dad?
Good.
Yeah. Anything new?
No, nothing new has been coming up.
Did I tell you I went back to the house, Dad?
Yeah,
The house we grew up in?
yeah. How was it?
It's still haunted. I recorded audio of the place, and I got a bunch of voices talking to me. One of them said that I was spoiled a lot, and I spent a lot of time locking myself in the bathroom. Did I used to lock myself in the bathroom?
Yeah.
I did. Okay. Do you remember anything that went on in that house? Things that you saw, couldn't explain? Anything that scared you? That's why I went back there, Dad. I wanted to see if it was still there. Face my fears and everything. Do you remember any of that?
I remember you spending the time in the bathrooms.
Yeah. So I wouldn't come out.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of the things I used to see at night when I'd say there was ghosts in the house?
Yeah.
What did I used to say? When I was scared at night and I'd want to sleep in your room? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What did I say? Do you remember? What was I afraid of?
The ghosts in the bathrooms.
Where else? In the hallways and everything?
Yeah.
Was that why I slept with the light on in the hallway?
Yeah.
Did any of that ever scare you?
No.
Why not?
Why should it? I was growing up.
You were my dad, so you had to
Yeah.
But none of it ever scared you?
No.
But it scared me. You knew that. Did it scare Kelly?
No.
Why was it only me then?
Because you had a spirit.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Dad?
Because you had to get out of it.
I had to get something out of it?
Yeah.
Experience?
Yeah.
So do you remember all the times that I used to see something in the bedroom, or the doors would open and close, and that type of stuff?
Yeah.
How come it never scared you? How come it never freaked you out? You just ignored it?
That's all.
Why did you ignore it? Because you didn't understand it?
That's all.
What's all? What do you mean, what's all? That's all?
I just didn't let it bother me.
So you just ignored it?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I remember you telling me the one time not to be afraid. Don't let it scare me, that
Right.
ignore it, they'll go away. You used to tell me that a lot. Just ignore them and they'll go away. Is that what you did then? You just ignored them? Did they go away?
Yeah.
And how come they kept appearing around me? How come I kept seeing them then?
Because you let them bother you.
Probably right. And there you have it. My dad says, you let them bother you. You know, my dad was a professional hockey player, okay? Played 13 years in the NHL. He was a tough son of a bitch. If you look him up, you can see some of his fights. They'll all tell you, my dad was fearless. He wasn't afraid of anything. So he's basically saying, hey, I just ignored it. You know, you're the one that had the problem with it. You're the one that had to get an experience out of it. You know, you kept delving into it and everything. And me, I just ignored it, you know. I have other conversations I've got to find too with my dad regarding stuff like this. Even one before he died, he was seeing spirits that were appearing to him. And I got one of them on video, actually, recorded as my dad was experiencing this, and him and I are having the dialogue of what he's seeing. And he just died shortly after that. So I'm glad I was able to share this with you guys. Hopefully it helped some of you, gave you understanding for some of you that have had fear of talking about with your family members or always wondered. Hopefully it brings some closure for you too. Now, I still got a lot of questions that people had asked me on Twitter regarding psychic abilities and stuff like that I'm going to talk about in the next podcast. I've got a couple other interviews I'm going to be doing over the next couple months with some individuals, and I'm going to flesh out some of these other podcasts. So I think the next one I'm going to do is a continuation of this, answering some of the other great questions that you guys asked about psychic abilities. And I'm also going to try to reach out to some of the babysitters and get them documented some of their experiences from their perspective of what they witnessed in the house on Park Lane that we grew up that was haunted, and have them share it with you as well. All right. Thank you for listening to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I will see you next time. Have a great day, great week, and a great month.